All right. Good morning, Ignite. How we doing today? There we go. Some energy. Who would have thought that a topic about cybersecurity would be so interesting and so many people would come out to kind of participate in this. So I'm super grateful to have an opportunity to be here with you today, and most importantly, to be talking about something that I'm deeply passionate about, and that is cybersecurity, and most importantly, incident response. So as the title says of our session today, it's You've Been Breached, Now What? So first, before we get started, let's go ahead. We'll do a quick introduction. I know some of you out there, but some of you I haven't had the honor to meet yet. So I'm Jeremy Nelson. I'm with Insight. I'm our CISO for North America. As part of my responsibilities, I oversee the entire portfolio of services we deliver on behalf of our clients to make sure that the work that we do is done in a secure fashion. But in addition to that, I lead our cybersecurity services delivery organization. And a big function and component of that is an incident response. So it's both good and bad that we get to, unfortunately, we have to observe our clients going through some of the darkest days of their careers, but we also have the fortune to actually be there and to have the skills, the experience, and the talent to be able to help them come out the other side of that. So a little bit more about me. Just a fun little fact is that I had never broken a bone in my entire life until I was 46 years old. And for some reason, during COVID, my midlife crisis wasn't to go out and buy a sports car. I did buy something with wheels, but it was a skateboard, and I thought somehow I'd be able at 46 to go out and relive my days of 13 on a skateboard and get right out there and tear it up in the front yard, and ended up falling within 30 minutes and broke both my wrist and my elbow. So I still keep the skateboard as a reminder sitting in my office that I am not 13 anymore. So that's a fun little fact. And as far as if you want to talk to me about something not cybersecurity related, I would love to connect with you about Magic the Gathering. I don't know how many MTG fans we have out there, but this past Christmas, my son came home from the University of Arizona and gifted me my very first deck of Magic the Gathering cards. And I'm like, this is awesome. My son is looking to connect with me in a new way, and he sees me as his Magic the Gathering buddy. And then it really hit me. In the summertime, after I'd already purchased tickets, purchased airfare, hotel, and other accommodations for the Magic the Gathering convention in Las Vegas, I realized that, he wasn't looking for a Magic the Gathering buddy. He was looking for an angel investor. And unfortunately, he found a very willing one. So, but I truly am grateful for the time that we get to spend together playing Magic the Gathering, and would love to connect with anybody about that if you want to stop by the booth later today. So let's go ahead, let's jump into incident response. So this is one of my favorite quotes as it relates to overall cybersecurity threats, and the ability for threat actors to be able to compromise a specific organization. This comes from the former CEO of Cisco Systems. There's only two types of companies out there: those who know they've been hacked and those who don't know that they've been hacked. And this is a very true sentiment with a lot of the various different CISOs that I meet with on a regular basis, is that they have stopped saying if. The word if is no longer in their vocabulary on when they will actually have a cybersecurity incident of their own. It is a matter of when. The overall sophistication, the financial backing that now sits between these threat actor groups is absolutely astronomical. You can look at the various different data points that are out there, and we are on track for the overall kind of dark economy of cybersecurity to reach $8 trillion, which makes them the third largest economy on the planet. That is tremendous funding that's out there supporting these various different nefarious activities of trying to stay in front of the good guys who are constantly trying to protect their digital assets and digital interests. So I figured there's that little bit inside of each one of us as human beings, that morbid curiosity. Everyone wants to know, like, what does an actual event look like? What does a kill chain look like? What is an event? How does it actually transpire? And so I figured, what better way to talk about you've been breached, now what, to actually go through a cybersecurity incident where we were personally involved from the very inception, from point of event to the point of recovery. So this is a real quick graphic that we put together, and I am going to be looking for some crowd participation. We've got some amazing subject matter experts here in the audience, and I'm going to be asking you to help me understand, where did this organization go wrong? So in this particular event, we had a company that was running some legacy firewalls out on the edge using traditional IPsec VPN for remote access. It was unpatched, end of support, and so this threat actor group was able to take advantage of a vulnerability in the code in that particular firewall appliance. They were able to brute force the credentials for a single user. Once they'd been able to brute force that user credentials, they were then able to basically build their own IPsec tunnel and come in and completely obfuscate all further traffic because it's now trusted as far as the overall perimeter security of this organization was concerned. Once they'd kind of got in, they were able to look around and they found a server. And they figured, hey, I've got a username and password. What are the chances that this is actually going to work and I'll be able to get access to this system sitting behind the firewall in this data center? It turned out it was 100%. They were able to use those exact same credentials to be able to get access to that system. They were able to get, it was only user access, wasn't elevated access, but it was just user access, but that was the first start. They now had access to a single system. Unfortunately, that system was also out of support, was not being actively managed for vulnerability management, and there were some significant critical patches that were missing from the overall life cycle of managing the underlying operating system of this server. So with those unpatched vulnerabilities, this threat actor was able to elevate their privileges on that system. They were then able to start downloading various different packages from the internet. These packages did a number of different things, everything from scanning tools, remote desktop and remote console tools, as well as, this is the big one, the ability to scrape and decrypt every password for the entire identity estate for this organization. And that's what they began to do. So once they were able to download, they were able to offload, and they started to deconstruct all the credentials for the organization, they were then able to have basically system admin access across the entire forest of their infrastructure. So then they were able to add their own Active Directory accounts in, and that's when the spread began. So they had their tools loaded, and they began to scan. As they scanned the environment, they were able to drop other payloads across various different systems within the data center, but this is where things really got nasty. They found the shared services pod. It was sitting unprotected, sitting behind all the various different enclaves and DMZs that oversaw the operations and critical systems for this environment. From that area, from that shared service space, they were able to scan further, and they were able to use identities and credentials that they were able to extract out of the Active Directory and get into the underlying hypervisor. From the hypervisor, they were able to download a new package. They had unfettered access to the entire storage domain for this organization. And they were able to initiate and detonated their package and encrypted every single virtual disk and virtual machine that sat on their storage array. Terabytes upon terabytes of data was encrypted. The interesting part about all of this is they didn't have security tools that initially detected the threat was happening. The original alert that something was amiss was because they were getting storage alerts, that their storage arrays were alerting them that they were running out of space. And that was strange because they had just recently added some new capacity. And as they went in and tried to do some investigation, they pulled it up. And hopefully, nobody in this room has seen this, but that's where they saw the note. And that's when things really started to go in a different direction. So once the actual ransom note had been detected, the good news is that we had already kind of been supporting this client when the storage alerts started happening. And so we immediately started to get engaged. We became the incident response organization that they reached out to, connected with, and we began to mobilize. And so the first thing is we started to actually bring in more resources in mass. And so this is everything from project managers, various different architects across the different aspects of the infrastructure. We're starting to look at identity, access management, but most importantly, we started to bring in a forensics team because we really needed to understand what that overall kill chain looked like. Because at this point, we knew what the end effect was, but we didn't exactly know how they came in. And if you don't know how they came in, you definitely can't restore because you need to make sure that you have the threat completely isolated and eradicated before you start a recovery process. So once we actually brought in the forensics teams, we understand what the overall kill chain looked like. The next step was to basically figure out what is production going to look like? How are we going to get restoration started? And as we looked at what their legacy environment was, we realized pretty quickly the best path forward for secure recovery was going to be building out a net new infrastructure. We literally had to recreate their entire cloud environment in a net new pod. And so basically what we did is we helped them en masse in the middle of the night, lots of times, basically stand up an entire data center infrastructure. We procured storage arrays over the weekend. So I don't know how many of you, when the last time you went through and did an actual storage acquisition was, how long that process takes. That's one of the great things in this particular circumstance is we were able to leverage a lot of our relationships and our partnerships. We were able to get an entire storage array quoted, purchased, and delivered within 48 hours. This was going to be the new clean area where we're going to be able to restore workloads into. We basically had another parallel compute environment stood up to be able to run those workloads once they had been restored. Then we moved into the identity piece. As we started to recover, we needed to make sure that everything in that space was no longer viable. So literally recreating their entire identity estate from scratch, working through supporting users as they went through reset passwords and getting them back to an environment where they knew that their identities were safe, that edge, that identity edge was something that was no longer going to pose a risk or have threat to the environment. And then recovering all those virtual machines, thousands upon thousands of virtual machines had to be recovered, and it's prioritization. This isn't just a simple data recovery type of a process. When you're talking about this level of volume, you need to go through and you need to work with the various different business stakeholders to identify what's the priority order, what needs to go first, what goes second, what are dependencies that these different applications have, and working through and getting those restored and getting those spun back up, and then making sure and validating that those are in a functional state post-restoration. And the most important piece is once you get it restored, getting it back into the data protection cycle. So we needed to make sure that it got into its normal operations before we just set it loose, because the last thing we wanted to do was to have it turn it back over to production, start consuming more data, have something go undetected within the environment, have the threat actor detonate another attack, and potentially lose any data that would have been captured during that recovered period. But once we were able to give the all clear, all system has been recovered, we went through a transition phase of turning basically operations in the environment back to the client. So I'd be remiss if I didn't call out that obviously Microsoft plays a huge part in these types of events. So just to kind of underlay the various different phases and stages of the Microsoft technologies that we used in order to be able to accomplish this pretty Herculean effort. So one of the big things is going through and making sure that we had good visibility, good monitoring, that we were able to detect threats and various different events that would happen post-event so that we would be able to detect and capture new spread. And if the threat actor was going to, again, be active within the environment, as we looked at building out the actual core infrastructure, we turned it into more of a hybrid type of an approach, both Azure as well as on-prem virtualization, incorporating Entra ID with multi-factor authentication, leveraging Windows 365 for privileged access management, as well as for secure access management and secure workstation, and then enabling Purview for data loss prevention and compliance. So that's a lot. I'm doing a lot of talking here for a minute. So I promised you we were going to do a little bit of Q&A. So if we look at, and I screwed up already, I get excited, and I forgot, I missed my opportunity. If we go back and we look at this kill chain, what are some things that are clearly and blatantly missing from their environment that allowed this to happen? So shout it out. Come on. Two-factor authentication, number one. I love it. Nice. What's another one? Patching, vulnerability management, patch management, lifecycle. Another one. What was that? Network segmentation. There's my guy right there. I'm a network guy at heart. So yes, network segmentation. One more? Monitoring. There it is. Monitoring. We should not be learning about a threat actor encrypting an entire storage array because we're getting storage capacity alerts. We should be knowing that there is suspicious activity happening. And do we got one more? I got one more that's top of mind. Privileged access management. I love it. We could go on and on. There are so many things. So one of the things that I wanted to highlight about that is that as I talk to various different CISOs and organizations of all shapes and sizes, over 70% of them, when I asked them, what are your 2025 initiatives? It's shocking. A lot of you would think, oh, we're driving CNAP, or we're driving this particular type of security initiative. Most CISOs are hyper-focused right now on getting back to the basics. All the things that you all shouted out, you know what the best practice is. But too many organizations, it's very difficult in order to be able to consume that. We have competing priorities, we have competing budgets, we have a variety of different reasons on why we don't incorporate them. And so as I talk to CISOs, their number one focus is we got to get back to the basics. We need to make sure that we're doing phishing-resistant MFA. We need to probably go through and relook at our edge security strategy. We're thinking about VPN and remote access completely different than we have before in the past. We need to start to enable some type of vulnerability and patch management lifecycle program. And so they're really just, it's getting back to the basics is one of the number one things that organizations are looking at today. So one of the other things that was really unique about this particular use case is that when we were going from a known, encrypted, and compromised environment and getting them into a production state, trying to think about what is the most effective and efficient way for us to be able to execute that recovery and make sure that we are keeping the new production as pristine and clean as possible. And so a lot of you have probably heard of the concept of white rooming. And so this is kind of like a similar concept known as an isolated recovery environment. So what we did is we actually built this in the middle of the night while we were working on this incident and literally constructing these various different pods. So you can kind of see here that there's 3 different zones in this one. So you've got your compromised state where we know that the data has been encrypted. We know that the threat actor is actively engaged and has access. And we knew that we were going to be transitioning to a net new production environment. It was built out. It was hardened from the get-go. But what we needed was what was that connective tissue in between. And that's where the isolated recovery environment came in. So it's a multi-zone approach to basically taking potentially restored data from so in this case, we were very, very lucky. The overall data protection storage environment was not impacted. So we were able to extract restored data and put it directly into this recovery zone and then preparing it to then be promoted into production. Post data validation, let me put this in order. Post IOC validation, that they had been identified and eradicated from the systems, post data validation, and post system performance and functionality validation. So we did like a whole series of checks within the recovery zone, and then we submitted it and promoted it back into production. One of the interesting things about this is something that the whole point is to get you all thinking about, in your specific organizations and environments, like how does this potentially play a role? Is this something you want to plan for? Is this something that you build into a plan that you would execute at the time of event? But the big one is because we went from a compromised environment to a net new data center build, we didn't want them to go out and have to buy a whole bunch of new stuff. So storage was an area where we really didn't have much of a choice. It was also a legacy aged environment, and so it really kind of benefited them to make that transition. But we did want to try and repurpose as much of the compute and other resources as we possibly could. And so we created what we called the hardware cleansing pipeline. So this was a way for us to take the compromised environment, cleanse it, and actually continue to promote and expand the production environment along with restoration activities that we went through. But then there's the deep, dark secret that lots of people don't like to talk about. And there is the active decryption. So I don't know if any of you know the statistics on this, but roughly 80% of organizations that find themselves the victim of mass scale encryption from malware pay the ransom. 80%. That is a staggering number. That was unfortunately the case with this particular organization. They did end up paying the ransom. And so what we needed to do is we needed to find a way, because there was data and there were assets in that environment that we were going to recover, but we needed to treat that very different than we did any other type of traditional system recovery activity. And so we built out a separate decryption zone where we went through very similar activities, but with much more rigor, with much more care to make sure that whatever we promoted out of the decryption zone into production was very clean. We were very confident. We knew that it was going to be safe. And in almost every case, I think there was only one instance where we did not directly promote a system. We literally just promoted the data. We built a net new system and migrated the data from the recovered infected infected data store in order to be able to get them back up and operational without any data loss. So unfortunately, like I said, 80%, this is happening. This is happening a lot. It's happening way too many times. These are some use cases. Obviously, we didn't include any names to try and protect the innocent as much as possible, especially because they are victims. We're not here to victim shame. But really, this is to kind of highlight how often this is happening and what is the magnitude. When these organizations become the victim of some level of mass scale encryption activity, these are the numbers that get associated with it. And so you think about it, there's the costs that are typically come with the actual recovery exercise itself. There's the cost of lost productivity and lost revenue, but some of these organizations had lost reputational value. And you can actually see that reflected in their stock price. Some of them lost 6+% valuation overnight just for being the victim of a cybersecurity attack and not having done the appropriate due diligence up front. One thing that I do want to highlight is that if we look at a lot of these use cases, one of the things that they all share in common isn't necessarily the actual attack, the action that was taken by the threat actor. Each one of them had gone through mass-scale M&A activities, and the threat actors used the various different gaps and soft spots in their organization that kind of create themselves during an M&A activity, and those were their entry points. Just like electricity, just like any human being, threat actors are looking for the path of least resistance. And when we do M&A activities, we inadvertently create paths of least resistance because it's hard. There's deadlines. We're under pressure to be able to do integrations quickly. We need to be able to get systems interconnected. We need to connect Active Directory forests or identity stores together. And so there's pressure, there's time, there's money on the line. And sometimes we leave cracks in our overall cybersecurity profile. And that's the case with a number of the organizations, both reflected here, as well as the use case that I talked about earlier. So, what's the light at the end of the tunnel? Light at the end of the tunnel, and this is really what our goal is as an organization, is to get companies thinking more proactively. Thinking proactively about their reactive reactions. And so everyone's familiar with the NIST framework kind of reflected along the bottom, but really kind of highlighting the people, process, tools, and looking at this through the spectrum of proactive versus reactive. So this is how we think about it at Insight. So we really take the various different components of what a proactive and a reactive strategy looks like, and we boil them down and we put them into these 4 different buckets. You've got your strategy and your governance. You've got your controls, remediation, and mass scale implementation. You've got your threat detection analysis, so that's on the proactive side. As we transition over into reactive, now you got like the attack forensics, threat analysis and triage in order to be able to detect, analyze, and eradicate. But then the big one is data and systems recovery. And I think a lot of organizations fail to consider just how heavy of a lift that is when we're doing mass scale recoveries. If we look at that previous example that I shared at the beginning of the session, only about 10 to 15% of the time was actually in the attack and forensic stage. And when we talk about incident response, that's where a lot of companies focus their efforts, focus their time, is really in that forensics, identifying what the kill chain is, understanding what your indicators of compromise are, doing threat hunting, capturing them in the environment, removing them, and getting you ready for recovery. But usually that's where those organizations kind of break away. And in this instance, we really want to make sure that organizations are thinking about what the recovery looks like and how do you do that at scale. And I would be remiss if I didn't call out what is the one constant from beginning to end, both proactive as well as reactive. And that is your security operations. That is your first line of defense. Every day, holidays, night times, because these threat actors know. I don't know about many of you in this room. I get really nervous around weekends. I get really nervous around 3-day weekends, and the holidays terrify me. Like I'm coming into Thanksgiving and I'm like, oh man, like I got this knot in my stomach. And it's not because my in-laws are coming over to stay with us. It's because I know what may be happening here within this part of my world. And so the security operations is really they're that line of defense. So when we think about security operations, this is how we kind of approach it here at Insight. So this is our security operations kind of workflow, if you will. So we think about it through 4 stages. And this, by the way, this is a structure that we use for monitoring, managing, and responding to events within our own infrastructure. But this is also a service that we provide to various different organizations who may not have the that maybe are on the journey to build their own security operations center, one of the biggest things that we look at, you go through and you look at the various different statistical data that's out there, and there are going to be roughly 3.5 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs by the end of next year. So when you think about the supply and the demand, everybody needs security. Everybody. There literally isn't a company out there that doesn't need cybersecurity of some form or fashion, but the amount of resources, the amount of supply that's out there in order to be able to get those professionals in-house, to get them trained up, to be able to build these programs, it's just not enough. And lots of organizations struggle to be able to have the budget, the financing, or sometimes it's even just the branding in order to be able to attract the talent that you need in order to be able to fill and run these types of programs. And so that's why it's something that as we built it out to manage and maintain our own environment, we wanted to provide this as a service out to other organizations. So you kind of do a little bit of load sharing. As far as like the recruiting and the various different costs that come with that. So we look at it through these 4 stages. The first one is obviously, it's the easiest. And this is one of the reasons why we're such deep partners with Microsoft, is because of the flexibility that they have to ingest data from so many different signaling sources. So lots of different other platforms out there are able to ingest signal data from a small subset of various different endpoints, maybe a certain or specific set of edge security appliances and firewalls. But really what we have come to value about our Microsoft partnership is our ability through Defender, Defender for Cloud, Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Cloud, Sentinel, you start layering in Copilot, and we can ingest so much rich information into our SIEM data store. And the ability that we have to correlate and analyze and identify attacks as they're happening and to be able to effectively respond to that is extremely powerful. So number one is making sure that you can take in all the data sources to have the richest contextualized data set that you can identify and respond to threats. The next piece is enabling your actual security analysts and threat hunting teams with the tools and technology that they need, that when an event does occur, that they're going out, they know how to scan, they know how to look for indicators of compromise, they know how to identify what a false positive looks like, and to be able to identify when something is real and how to get that properly escalated. And this is through a series of both people enablement, training, but it also comes into intellectual property and developing tools and automation to be able to augment the various different out-of-box capabilities that Sentinel and other platforms of that nature have. The next one is when something does happen. This is when we don't have a false positive. It's a positive positive. And this is the overall life cycle that we see. So we basically transition from threat detection into kind of really analyzing what's the scope and assess and prioritize what's actually happening. How do we then real-time move that into a triage state with our incident response team, moving that into incident investigation through forensics, and then kind of following that entire chain all the way through where we capture those indicators of compromise, isolate them, contain them, remove them from the environment, and if need be, help support them on any recovery efforts and get them back up to production. But the last one is the most important. It's closing the loop. We need to make sure that we have the response loop. We want to learn from every single event that we encounter. We want to make sure that we're making ourselves stronger every single day. And so as you're leading your own security operations team, I would highly recommend thinking about this response loop process that we have here, take a picture, and really kind of work with them on how do we make sure that when you detect a threat, that we're incorporating that into our day-to-day operations and processes and methodologies so that we can stop it faster and potentially capture it sooner and reduce the risk even further to our organizations. In similar fashion, so as we dig a little bit deeper into that third phase, this is kind of like our incident response and recovery methodology that we use. So you can kind of see it goes through preparation, so no big shock. You don't want to just come in guns a-blazing, restoring out of the gate, deleting files off of servers. We want to make sure that we really understand through that forensics aspect that really what are those indicators of compromise. We want to do our proper discovery, we want to know what we're dealing with, and then we want to build a plan off of that. And if one thing that you'll notice here is we document that plan. We never want it to be verbal. We want it to be super crisp and clear that the various different folks that we're going to be working with understand what that plan looks like. Because the worst thing in these types of environments is you set people loose, and if it's not documented, they're going to have their own interpretation of what the intent is and how it is that they're going to address it. And that's how you end up with either reinfection, that's how you end up with data loss. And so really making sure that we document and execute that plan. We do plan validation. Then the big one here is resource management. One thing that I have discovered in every incident response that I have supported is that most organizations forget of how important their resources are, but also how limited. So one of the things in every single case, this has been consistent with every single incident response that I've seen, is that when a threat actor gets in and they detonate and we find ourselves in the middle of one of these mass scale events, is the first people to throw themselves in front of the bus is the IT team. And they will be working 24/7 under some of the highest pressure circumstances imaginable to a human being. And what ends up happening is they get burned out. They start making mistakes. And so both it ends up impeding your ability to recover quickly, but most importantly, when you come out the other side, you're probably going to lose some of your top talent, some of the people that actually allowed your organization to move forward. And so that's one of the things that I really caution various different leaders around is be careful. Don't put your human capital at risk during an actual incident response. And so that's why the resource alignment is so important, is that really knowing who are your partners, what is going to be your flex staffing plan, so that when an event does occur, who are you going to call in? Who's going to be able to provide resources to you in a very short fashion in order to be able to scale up your team and allow them to be leaders and guides of the various different scale resources that get brought in, but also to give them that break, to give them that rest, so that they can continue to fight that good fight, because these go on for a long time. I don't know if you caught this in the first two slides that we had. It only took 28 days for that threat actor to be able to compromise that entire environment. It took 93 days to recover. I don't care who you are. You can be Superman. You are not working 93 days straight, 24/7. It just doesn't work. So having that resource alignment and that resource plan is absolutely critical. And then you get into the actual execution of the plan. Execution review, you're going back, making sure that you're seeing the intended results, and then closing out the recovery. All right. So, done a lot of talking. That's a lot. I only had 45 minutes, and this is a big, big topic. So I wanted to make sure that I was able to share with you as much as possible. But this is really one of the things that I wanted to share is we are here to help at the end of the day. And that's really kind of like our mission, is to be there to help support our clients in some of those darkest days. So really from an insight perspective, we can support you through discovery workshops to understand what your actual cybersecurity and recovery maturity looks like, advising and counseling on various different approaches and ways to set yourself up, both from an incident response planning all the way through execution and resolution, and then technical deployment. We have the capability and capacity to deploy some of the most mature cybersecurity architectures and platforms at mass scale within the industry. So really coupling everything together from soup to nuts. If we think about that big kind of graphic that I showed that had the 4 pillars, Insight has the capability to go from left to right and help support you on that entire journey, including managed security, where we are within the top 1% of Microsoft partners on managed security. Incident response, we've talked about this a little bit. I think one of the things that I think is extremely important is that these are not just technical in nature. There is a lot of communication that's involved. There is a lot of project management and program management, prioritization, business analysis that has to be done. And so bringing that full level of capabilities to the table, along with augmenting your team along the way to help really build out that robust incident response plan. So, here's your call to action. I want everyone to walk away from this session today, and I want you to commit to the number one thing to basically improving the response of a breach within your organization and minimizing impact is to have a plan. We'll play a fun little game. How many of you here, your organizations actually have an incident or crisis response plan? There we go. I love it. How many of you have reviewed them in the past 6 months? Ooh, that's nice. That's a good percentage. Well done, everybody. All right. So for those of you who didn't raise your hand, and even for those of you who did, because maybe I'll give you a couple little things to think about is go back to your organizations. Commit to having a review of your incident or crisis response plan today. Number 1 is understand the degree and value of your data gap. So when I talk about 80% of organizations who end up paying the ransom, it's because of the value of their data gap. So go through, look at what your data protection strategies look like. Look how fast, look at what your point of time would be, that if you were to have an incident occur, what is the largest gap of potential lost data that you might have? What's the value associated with that? and then figuring out what do you need to do in order to be able to adjust that data protection strategy to shrink that further. Because we don't want you paying ransom. Every time that an organization pays a ransom, it increases the funding and it increases the number of people who get into this shady line of work who are out there on the other side trying to execute these attacks. Number two, like I said, protect your resources. Build your rapid response staffing plan. Understand who your partners are. And when you're going through and you're doing your tabletop exercises, I highly recommend that you invite them to participate. You want that staffing plan, you want that staffing strategy to be a part of the practices that you run. And the last one being, put your plan into action and practice. Just like when we go out, whether you're playing sports, whether you're playing Magic the Gathering, whatever you're doing, you never want the first time for you to get punched in the face to be in live combat. Like, you want to practice. You want to make sure that this is a rote reflex that you have built into your organization in order to execute your response plan. And so with that, we'll go ahead, let's open it up to some questions. I tried to go through this to make sure that we had some questions, some time for Q&A. Oh, there's a mic right here, just to make sure that everyone remote can hear. So if you want to come up and ask a question.
Just actually one comment.
Yep.
Your cybersecurity insurance provider may not give you an option on whether
Yes.
you pay or not. Because if
Correct.
the recovery process to get your data back after a breach is going to be longer and more expensive than paying the threat actor, they'll pay the threat actor.
Yeah.
You won't have any choice in the matter.
Yeah, that is a great comment. Cybersecurity insurance plays a huge role in these types of events. So usually, in this particular case that I highlighted today, we were already working with this organization as a part of the storage issue. But normally, cybersecurity insurance is your first phone call that you make, legal being second, and then you're starting to look at your various different providers. But that's a great call out.
How did you determine how far back to do the recovery on the backups?
So it definitely comes in. So that's a big part of the attack chain. So when you go through, what you want to work with your forensics team is trying to identify when did this all start. And so that's how we knew that it was 28 days back. And so as we looked at it, we looked at the various different systems, and we tried to identify a point in time where we knew that we would be doing a clean backup. And so some of it is you have to use that clean room to do an initial restore, look for those indicators of compromise, and then it really comes down to a business and a risk decision on if you feel comfortable just cleaning the IOCs and recovering the data, or at least doing some level of validation within the clean room before promoting it into production. So it's a little bit of a business risk kind of analysis that you have to do on a system-by-system basis. Any other questions? Oh, another one.
Jeremy, maybe folks can visit us at booth 420 if they want more info.
Oh yeah, I've got a slide specifically for that, Reem, but thank you.
First of all, thank you for highlighting that wasting human resources is not a good idea.
Yeah.
And the second question, or my question is, what do you recommend as a PAM solution, a good PAM solution besides of the Azure modules that are available?
So CyberArk is another one that we partner with on a pretty frequent basis. We also use Secret Server. So those are like typically the three that we work with as an organization. I think I saw a hand.
Jeremy.
Oh,
Hi, sorry, we have a question from the chat.
Yes.
And it's around insurance during, recovery from a ransomware. So could you expand maybe on, what you need to really have insurance actually support you during that process, and then really where they're limited from like the forensics perspective, but then that remediation process, like how you move forward with that?
Yeah, so a lot of it is going to depend on the actual policy that you sign. So each policy and each individual insurer is going to have its own requirements around forensics. And so that's why that first phone call that you make post-event really should be to your cybersecurity insurer, because it is possible, coming back to your point, the gentleman here that made the comment about paying the ransom or not, they may already have pre-negotiated incident response retainers on file. And so they're going to have specific ones that they're going to mandate that you use and get engaged from the get-go. So, and some of them, depending on the overall level of policy that you signed up for, may turn the keys back over to you. So there's a lot that goes into cybersecurity insurance. Number one is having a policy. And that is actually getting a little bit more complicated these days in and of its own right. So we are starting to see cybersecurity insurers be a little bit more selective, and we're even partnering with a few of them to help them do insurability studies so that your overall risk profile matches with theirs so that they can get you to an insurable state so they can sign you up for a policy. So number one is have a policy. Number two is review the overall requirements of your policy and what's actually covered and what's supplied by your actual cybersecurity insurer. And they should always be your first phone call, and they will help guide you and provide you with both resources. Lots of times they'll provide both forensics as well as hostage negotiators to help actually directly communicate with the threat actors. Oh, one more.
Hi, how did you isolate the infrastructure in your first example to prevent any further encryption?
Yeah, so to be honest with you, it was already fully encrypted in the first example. Like there was no isolating any further spread because basically the entire storage system that was back-ending the virtualized infrastructure was completely encrypted. And so that's why we went down the path of building an entirely net new environment. And so, go ahead. And we kept them air-gapped.
Because in the media you often hear they're shutting down the whole data center, but you can't access anything then. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and in this case, there was no point in trying to shut anything down because it was all encrypted. So we did end up taking that storage array offline as we actually reconstructed and rebuilt the new environment. But yeah, in this particular instance, like shutting things down wasn't going to be a huge, it shut itself down. All right, we've only got 3 minutes left. Any other questions? All right, so if you like the content that you heard here, oh, was there another question? I'm sorry. One more question. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Oh, you're good. Just wondered if you had an opinion on like a ban on ransomware payments or other ways to make it not profitable.
Yeah, so it's hard to put a ban. Again, sometimes you don't actually get to make the choice because you're not necessarily holding the purse strings all the time when it comes to actually getting through the negotiations and working with various different threat actors. The challenge there is that even if you're forced to actually pay the ransom and do the decryption and recovery, like you still have to treat that data very, very sensitively. It's actually gotten really interesting. I don't know how many people have actually gone through this before in the past, but these threat actor communities, they are very interested in their reputation. And so the way that they get paid is by delivering decrypted data. And so they work really, really hard. Some of them will actually ransom you, tiered recovery plans. So they'll literally have like a bronze, silver, gold, and platinum package that will actually include telephone support, where you can literally call them, and they will even have like warranty periods. So it's really difficult to come out and just say like, we have a strict policy not paying the ransom. Sometimes it's not going to be your choice, and it's really going to come back to what's the value of that data gap, to be honest with you, because it may be to the point where you do that calculus, and as bad as it is to pay into that community, your organization may not be able to survive if you don't. Like we've had some where they have tightly controlled federal government's data compliance regulations, and losing the data was literally not an option. So, yeah, we can do one more. We're going to get kicked out in minute 30, though.
I'll be quick then. So it was back to, I think it was on one of the slides about IoT and OT
Yes.
protection. Oh. What do we, thoughts, recommendations?
Yeah.
We've gone down that road once.
So one of the biggest that we have with IoT, OT is really, it comes back to the network segmentation component of this, right? Because when you start looking at IoT, OT devices, it's very limiting as far as like what you can actually execute from a vulnerability and patch management perspective. So, you know, I do a lot of work with healthcare organizations. By the way, this one did not get hit in any way, shape, or form, but they had a series of GE, I believe that they were heart monitors that actually had a legacy open source TCP IP stack on them that was vulnerable, and it made them susceptible to remote code execution. And so they looked at it, and it was literally going to cost $60 million to replace all of these across their entire care facilities. And so what we did is we helped them do a contextualized network segmentation strategy that identified those and quarantined them off. So there was no way of lateral movement. You couldn't actually address them unless from the actual nursing hub system. And so that network segmentation allowed them to kind of de-scope those from a risk standpoint. And so we didn't necessarily have to worry about the patch management, but it is on their overall risk register, and it is something that they're working to maintain. So the other piece is that a lot, especially on OT side, it's remote access, right? Remote access for the third-party vendors, and really working with organizations to kind of take a different approach. A lot of time, the OT vendors are the ones that are dictating the way that remote access for support is being provided, and really working to kind of break that chain and doing much more secure approaches to providing remote access to OT systems for support. So that's typically, we can get much deeper into that. But I know I'm out of time. In fact, they're even dimming the lights. We've got a couple more sessions coming up, some today, some tomorrow. So please come visit us. And if you want to get your cybersecurity maturity on a higher level, come visit us at booth 420. And as you'll notice, no QR codes. I am a huge an anti-QR code, but we do have a couple of URLs there for you to follow if you want to get more information. But please come visit us at booth 420 to learn more.